What's up, Flick Connection? This is Darren, and today we're going to talk about sequels. Sequels often disappoint audiences. They're usually just a cash grab from the studio trying to recapture the success of the original, and audiences usually have really high expectations for them, and they're often the place where high expectations and uninspired cash grabs come together, leading to nothing but disappointment. But every now and then, there's a sequel that comes along that does more than the original. Today I want to talk about 5 unique sequels that are considered to be the best sequels ever made. Rather than counting down, I want to start with number 1 because it's such an obvious pick. And then we'll just work our way to number 5, and you can have a little bit of suspense just wondering what if one of your favorites actually made the cut. So the first on our list, and pretty much everybody's list concerning sequels, has to be The Godfather Part 2. Now, I'll go ahead and say this is not my personal favorite on this list, but it's the highest rated. It's still ranked number 2 on the IMDB Top 100. It has been for years, and for good reason. It's certainly probably the best crafted on the list, and as one of the most famous directors in the world, Francis Ford Coppola, this is pretty much unarguably his masterpiece, and it's almost arguably the best movie on this list. And as far as a sequel goes, you'd be hard-pressed to find one that's better crafted, better acted, and that has held up to such a high level for as long as The Godfather Part 2. And more importantly, like everything on this list, it's actually better than the original. Audiences had expectations for it, it exceeded them, and has continued to hold up that high bar for decades. And so that's why The Godfather Part 2 is number 1 on our list of the best sequels ever made. Number 2 on our list is the fan favorite and probably beats out The Godfather Part 2 for a lot of you watching, and it has to be The Empire Strikes Back. What this movie did for that franchise, I say that franchise, for one of the biggest franchises in movie history, it goes without saying. It really solidified Star Wars as an epic franchise. Episode 4, the original, was great, had a big audience, really surpassed any and all expectations that the studio and the creators had for it, but Empire took things to a whole new level, did new things with visual effects. But for me, the reason it was as successful as it was is because it didn't rehash the original, kind of like the complaints you've heard about The Force Awakens, where it felt like we were just sort of rehashing Episode 4. Empire Strikes Back did not do that. It went in a completely different direction, so much so that the other 2 movies in the original trilogy really end on a high note. Really, they both end with a celebration of sorts, whereas Empire really ends on a low note. Right after probably one of the biggest twists in movie history, Luke has lost his hand, the group is in disarray, there's a lot of questions, and it's a really, really big cliffhanger ending that at that time, audiences had to wait years for Return of the Jedi to come out. Now we're so conditioned to binge watching that level of a cliffhanger would just drive people nuts. It'd probably break the internet today. So Empire Strikes Back definitely deserves to be high up on this list, but because of the prestige of The Godfather Part 2, I just had to put it at number 2. Number 3 on this list is another one that's highly ranked on the IMDb Top 100, and that is The Dark Knight. What this movie did for the comic book genre was incredible, and so much so that it's been replicated poorly over and over again. The creators of The Amazing Spider-Man tried to go down this dark, brooding path, and they basically just tried to emulate what they saw in Christopher Nolan's Batman, but they couldn't really capture the heart of what he was getting at. And really what he created with this was the most realistic comic book focused movie I think ever made, and that probably will be made for a very, very long time. It's going to be a long time before this movie is topped within its own genre. Um, I don't know that we'll ever see a Batman movie as good as this ever again. Not just because of the direction that the current ones are going, but it's just going to be so hard to top. And then Heath Ledger's performance, it's going to be a long time before we see that top. So it really stands alone, but just like the other two, it is better than Batman Begins. And Batman Begins was a great movie. It did way better than anyone expected when it came out. Christopher Nolan really reinvented Batman with it, and there were really high expectations for The Dark Knight, and it met all of them. For me, as much as I love that movie, it does kind of drag a little bit as it gets towards the end after the Joker escapes, and then there's the sort of tussle with the two fairies, and then the Two-Face saga kind of maybe goes on a little bit too long. But even with that complaint, it's still so rewatchable, even as long as it is. It might be my personal favorite on this list, but definitely deserves to be high up on the list and is easily one of the best sequels ever made. All right, number 4, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I know some of you might not be sure about that one, but it has got to be still, even with today's technology, one of the best action movies ever made. It fits the criteria of being better than the first, which is a big one, and it really builds upon what is set up in the first. It expands the universe, even though we get sort of a simple story. As long as it's a very simple story, but all of the backstory creates all of these different layers with it, and it really improves a lot on the original concept, and is by far the better movie. It's the first year they did the MTV Movie Awards. It won Best Movie that year, and really was the biggest movie of the year, and is still one of the bigger and better movies in that genre. In fact, it was so big that it has allowed them to make, 3 crappy Terminator movies since. They're all bad. I liked Terminator Salvation when I first saw it, but on multiple viewings, it's just really loose and sloppy. It could have been great, but it wasn't. Terminator Genesis sucked. Terminator 3 was essentially Schwarzenegger trying to recreate Terminator 2 with a lot of his own money, and it just doesn't work. That kind of had a cool ending where there was a little bit of information we got, but it really is an unnecessary movie. In fact, I consider all 3 Terminator movies to come out after T2 to be completely unnecessary Terminator movies. 1 and 2 stand alone. It'd be great if we could have got a third to kind of round out the trilogy, but you don't have to have that. For me, this movie, if you watch it today, it still looks amazing. And most of what you're seeing is in camera. The liquid metal effect was really the most advanced thing they could do with CGI at the time, which means everything else you're seeing is actually happening. That may not sound like a big deal, particularly for some younger viewers, but I'm telling you, today, explosions are CGI, destruction CGI, a lot of things are barely done in camera and then heavily enhanced afterwards. And Terminator 2, with that knowledge, if you go back and watch it, it looks like it was filmed yesterday, but everything is actually happening on camera. It's amazing. As long as that movie is to sit down and watch, it doesn't feel like it's almost 3 hours. It really goes by quick because it's so fast-paced, and you're getting a lot of story with very little words. There's something where I think Schwarzenegger actually got paid somewhere around $21,000 plus per word for that movie because he had a fat paycheck, I think of around $40 million, but he only says about 600 words total for the entire movie. So if you break it down that way, not only does Schwarzenegger get paid a lot per sort of mispronounced word, but the movie does a lot for you in terms of visual storytelling. They really give you a lot of information without having to say a lot, which to me, this is the best way for a film to communicate with you. If they have to over-explain everything, it's maybe not worth explaining. If they can do it visually, then a movie is the perfect medium to tell that story. And for me, it's one of my favorites on the list, but I think I've got it placed properly. So for number 5, I've actually got one from the same director. Hearing that, some of you may know what it is. It's Aliens. The reason this is number 5 and not higher is because I don't consider it to be better than the original. Doesn't mean it's not as good. In this particular case, these are two very different movies that happen to take place in the same universe with one universal character. Alien, as great as it is a horror movie. Aliens, as great as it is, it's an action movie. Again, they take place in the same universe, but they're two very different types of stories. And the reason it even makes it on the list at all instead of something else, especially considering it's following another James Cameron movie, is because it really builds on top of Alien in a really amazing way. Rather than just kind of having another space horror movie, which they easily could have done. They could have got the xenomorph costume in there. They could have built some new sets. They could have got some new actors to eat. And people would have paid to go see it. It would have made money. I don't know that we'd be talking about it today, and I don't know that we'd have another Alien movie about to come out. What James Cameron was able to do with this sequel was really build upon the original, expand that universe, and do just some really wild stuff with it that was completely different from what took place in Alien. The monsters are the same, but you're in a completely different environment, whereas before you've got sort of a scared blue-collar crew that has a flamethrower, and they really don't know what to do, and they don't know what they're up against. In this one, the audience knows what they're up against, and you're dealing with the colonial marines who have heavy weaponry, and there's still no match for these monsters. And it really just turns into this incredible action movie. So finally, the reason it even makes it, because I debated on should I have 2 James Cameron movies on the list, there's really nothing else to put on this list of 5. Once you start looking at other sequels, there's plenty of good ones, but as far as great ones that really build upon the original and really expand things, there's really not any. Spider-Man 2, it was a great sequel. It was maybe better than the original, but when's the last time you heard somebody talking about Spider-Man 2? Evil Dead 2, love it, but it doesn't really do anything new. In fact, it's really just sort of a remake with more money, which I think is cool as hell. I really like it a lot, but it doesn't make its way into the top ones ever made. And unfortunately, a lot of sequels suck. So if you feel like I neglected something or didn't put your favorite on there, let me know in the comments below. Tell me what you would have booted out of this list, because in order to get something else in the top 5, something has to go. So what would you have booted? If you like my list but think there should have been a different order, let me know. If you liked the video and you want to see more videos like this, please click the like button. It helps the video get more views and really helps me grow this channel. I've only started it just recently. So also, please subscribe if you want to see more things like this, if you want to see what I've got coming out in the future. And also check us out on Instagram. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.